I feel that my media product has developed and challenged conventions of real media products in many ways. In this answer, I will discuss how I have done so in all areas of my media products, including the trailer, magazine and poster. For each product I analyse pre-existing products in the same genre to see any common conventions I may use or develop. To start with the poster, I feel I've broken conventions in the shot that I used, as most horror posters I previously analysed use medium close-ups or extreme close-ups. However, I felt as though the image I used would be more effective, and having the long shot means I was able to manipulate the image so it symbolises the antagonist being in control and above the protagonist. However, I do feel as though I follow conventions by having a faded black background and keeping it all simplistic, with little text and a little colour scheme. I think having it this way is most effective and gives less distraction for the audience. When I was doing my magazine, I kept the common conventions I found in mind and decided which ones I would follow and which ones I would challenge. For example, I feel as though I follow conventions by having a medium close-up for my main image and having 3 main cover lines. I also followed a small colour scheme of no more than 3 colours, which is a common convention for a horror magazine. The way I challenged conventions with my horror magazine was with the way I left it simplistic, whereas most other horror magazines I had analysed were fuller. However, I felt as though packing the magazine full of text and images made it more of a pop magazine than a horror, and it took away the creepy effect. With regards to my trailer, I feel as though I developed conventions more than I challenged them. For example, my costume for all my characters. In every psychological horror trailer I reviewed, all the protagonist costumes are casual and up-to-date, whereas the antagonist costumes are more old-fashioned and formal. This creates binary opposition between the two. Another way I created binary opposition, which I feel develops on conventions, is the way I portrayed the characters. For example, their emotional range. The antagonist shows very little emotion in the entire trailer, whereas there's a number of scenes showing different emotions from the protagonist. My scene lengths and music changes are some of the more subtle common conventions I stuck to. While analysing the pre-existing horror trailers, I noticed that no scene was really much longer than 8 seconds, and that just as scares happen, there is a quick music change, sometimes followed by calming music. This affected the way I edited my trailer in a positive way and allowed me to create more effective scares and build tension. My setting was yet another way I stuck to conventions. In most horrors I looked at, the setting was in an isolated area and a house. However, the one thing about the setting I did change is having the antagonist brought in from the isolated area, rather than from history in the house. I did this as I felt having the same story as the others I had reviewed would be too predictable and wouldn't make the audience think. This goes with Steve Neal's theory, where he suggests that pleasure comes from similarities and differences, so I tried to create both in my trailer. I also got the antagonist to behave in ways as a normal person would, although she is playing a ghost. One way I did this was by having her dance. I think this develops on conventions, and I was inspired by the psychological horror trailer Insidious. I also challenged conventions with my trailer by going against props character type theory. In my trailer, I have no princess type and no hero type. In turn, this also leads me to have no false hero, no donor, no helper, and no princess's father or dispatcher. It also goes against Chodrov's theory, as in the end there is no solution and equilibrium isn't restored. One of the main ways I've challenged conventions is by having a child antagonist. Most of the psychological horror trailers I reviewed had an older antagonist. I decided to do it with young children as I felt it would be more sinister and relatable for the audience, making it more real to them. I think having my antagonist as a young girl also goes against the stereotypes of the man being in power and having control over a woman's life. I also broke conventions by not having a logo in the bottom corner as my trailer played. I decided not to do this as I felt it would give less distraction to the audience if left blank. The camera angles are very important, and the most common ones used in horror trailers are Dutch tilt, establishing shot, close-ups and point-of-view shots. These are used with the purpose of making the audience feel uncomfortable and to make them ask questions, such as where will these lead, where are they going, and what's going to happen. I feel as these are very effective, and I tried to use as many as I could in my trailer. For example, my point-of-view shot while running and my close-up of the protagonist drawing. This also meant I was following Godrod's theory of close-ups being able to create emphasis as well as revealing emotion. Another thing I did with regards to camera angles and setup is have the antagonist above the protagonist. This is a common convention in horrors and gives the impression that the antagonist is in control.